every system will have a consequence, rightly so.
Yeah.
And as human beings, we need to just build capacity to adapt to those consequences.
This is the first time that I'm telling this story.
Hello there, and welcome to Whips and Chains.
An individual can be sold innumerable times.
What are the whips that we flog ourselves with often?
I discovered cancer, I had breast cancer.
And what are the chains that bind us down?
फिर मैंने YouTube पे देखा कि फीमेल फिटिसाइड होता कैसे
Is something I want to explore in my show.
They're orphans.
It's okay. It's okay.
गर्दन निकलती है बाकी हिस्सा ऐसे ऐसे करके निकलता है यार इतना बड़ा पाप होता अपने गांव में
It's horrific.
Somebody passed me by and hit my bum.
He did have a personality disorder.
कई बार मैं सो ही नहीं सका
All the traffickers that I've seen, they are common people like you and me.
She said, Kanda tu dein, vata putar tu.
If you talk about human trafficking, it's $1 billion business.
There was a lot of violence, a lot of aggression.
बड़े बड़े पुल बना दोगे उनसे ह्यूमैनिटी तो नहीं बनने वाली
And welcome to Whips and Chains. Welcome to Whips and Chains. Mental health globally, and particularly after COVID, has become a real concern, and it's become a conversation that people are having at every level, whether it's in the professional world, whether it's socially, and even personally. Mental health conversations are increasingly taking center stage. My guest today, Astha Alhuwalia, has started this fabulous mental health organization where she deals with all levels of mental health. So, whether it is for organizations, individuals, corporates, and personal issues, LGBTQA, social issues, any kind of addictions and therapies. So she is offering a sort of one-stop shop for all your mental health concerns. So Astha, it's lovely to have you here with me today because I really, when we met, I really, in talking to you at that retreat, I felt that you had a very big picture overview of what is going on in the mental health scenario and what we can best do to kind of match up and fill in the gaps, to prevent sort of further collateral damage along the way. So thank you for coming here today, right?
Thank you for having me here, Nivedita. And like you said, I think you're already filling the gap by having this conversation. I think what mental health needs to begin with is a lot more conversation, a lot more different perspectives to understand how our mind works and the impact that it has. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, so okay, so let's start at this idea of where you have called your organization Reboot Wellness. Okay, so it's the idea behind it is of course wellness, but it's also rebooting it. So approaching it with a lot of different sorts of energies, right? Because it's a very broad frame view of mental health, that it brings in wellness, it brings in new energy strategies. So tell me how you came to this sort of idea.
So, thank you for asking me that question because I think it's important to understand mental health from a slightly broader perspective. So the name reboot essentially signifies our need and responsibility to change ourselves, reboot ourselves, break the patterns and circumstances that don't help us or are not helping us anymore. We're all creatures of habit. We are all cognitive misers as human beings. And we all get stuck in patterns that, over a period of time don't give us the result that we want them to. Those are mental patterns, thought patterns, belief systems, relationship patterns, etc. And all of these require a pause and reflection, and that's what reboot does. I'm very happy to offer a wide range of services through this organization because I don't feel that one fits all. I think different people have different needs, and it's important for us as mental health professionals to understand that different people will have different needs and not everybody can be served in one box. And that's the aim. I have a beautiful team of mental health professionals. We have counseling psychologists, clinical psychologists, therapists who specialize in specific kind of areas, which cater to specific populations, which cater to specific concerns. We also work a lot in de-addiction. And yeah, so it's the aim is to provide that space to first understand an individual for who they are,
Yeah.
help them in the best way that suits them, and help them,
Grow.
bring perspective to their life.
Yeah,
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 grow
yeah.
essentially.
So, like when we were growing up, or say even, 2 or 3 decades ago, there was this understanding that mental health is a place where you think about it as a problem when you stray from the norm. There was such an idea that there is the norm,
Yeah.
and when you stray from it, then there is a problem.
Mm.
But now that has changed a lot. That perception has changed a lot because people have understood that what is a norm for you may not be a norm for your neighbor,
Hmm.
right? So can you talk about a little about how this idea that there is a norm has broken down completely, and what are the dominant areas where you are seeing that normative breakdown?
It's very interesting. The world existed a lot in dichotomy for a very long time, and that was mainly for convenience and just to bring in more structure in the society. And I totally understand and respect that space, very sociological in nature. But um, from a psychological perspective, the first sentence that we read in our general psychology book in our first year of undergrad is there are individual differences, which basically means that if there are 8 billion people on the face of this earth, there are 8 billion perspectives existing at least, right? There are 8 billion minds, and no two minds will be same as the other. And that is the norm. I mean, more than the norm, that's a reality. We do have commonalities that bring us together as a society. We share common values, we share common belief systems, we share common historical and current experiences also, that brings us together. But I think covid did a COVID sort of created a domino effect, or started the domino effect that allowed to include different norms, as
Yeah.
as they call it. There were different, I mean, as psychologists and mental health professionals, we don't like to use the word
Yeah.
normal too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think what
Yeah.
has broken with COVID is that there is a possibility of
Dichotomies.
life beyond what we know it, or
Yeah.
how we see it.
Yeah.
And that includes preferences in the way we live, preferences in the way we function, preferences in our partnerships, preferences in our social relationships, and just including the possibility of people being different than what they are expected to be. And that is a big shift that the world is taking right now. I think technology has a lot to do with that as well. It's bringing together a lot of different mindsets. So like, when I was growing up, though I knew that there is an America and there is a Europe and there are these different countries, and I would read about them in those encyclopedias and books, I wouldn't know what's going on there on a daily basis. Today I know,
Yeah.
thanks to the
Yeah.
social media and
Yeah.
all the technological development that's going on. So
Yeah.
it's broken down the fact that, or a belief system that this is how the world is.
Right.
So the world is expanded, which has led to the possibility of inclusivity
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
people.
But it's also, I think, led to a situation where we are no longer thinking as communities, we are thinking as individuals. That sense of individualism, and also, strangely enough, isolation in the midst of so much communication,
Yeah,
it's a peculiar kind of phenomenon that,
such a catch 22,
yeah,
right?
completely catch
It is,
22.
it is,
So I think mental health is now becoming a concern among all generations.
it is.
It isn't that, earlier one used to feel that at certain key stages of life, there is something that might warrant mental health intervention.
Hmm.
Now even regular day to day living can warrant that, isn't it?
Yeah. I think mental health is not restricted to just me and my mind. Mental health borrows a lot from the social health also. My society, my community, the environment that I'm a part of is definitely going to influence the way I think, the way I feel, and what I do. And that's what mental health is: our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Yeah.
And I can't live in isolation, is something that the world is also recognizing. Just a couple of days back, I was in another interview where somebody asked me that what is the one cause for so much of mental health,
Yeah.
upheaval and
Yeah.
conversation and changes that are going on. And I think not one cause, it's not the only cause, but a very predominant factor that's influencing mental health concerns is the sociability or the lack of sociability that we have. There's so much of loneliness despite being constantly surrounded by influx of information of what's going on and being caught up with it. We're human beings are getting more and more isolated. The need for community, the need for tribes, the need for having a society that allows you to be you is increasing very quickly, and that's putting a lot of pressure on how we evaluate and view ourselves as human beings also.
Yeah. And I think this kind of, isolation is also leading in a parallel sense to people doing these kind of retreats and random get-togethers and social groups as such.
Hmm.
In fact, you and I met on one,
On one.
and like I kind of joked with someone, I said I slept with her before I knew her because
Well, technically we
yeah,
did share a room.
we did
We
share
did.
a room. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
mean, that's how. And so I think increasingly it is important to meet people outside your comfort zone also, to realize who you are, where you stand, and even self assess.
Hmm.
And that self assessment and self reflection as a tool has also become so important now. That
It
wasn't the
was.
case
It
20
wasn't.
years ago you know
You know, every generation is a rebel to the previous one. So, whatever I have seen or I have found uncomfortable growing up, I will rebel against it as an adult, right? And that is what I would possibly try and inculcate in my life. And that's what's happening. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, post independence in India at least, there was a lot of everybody was holding on to their families very closely, right? That increased a lot of toxicity within the families, that increased a lot of unhealthy patterns. Again, what I was talking about
right,
earlier,
right,
the newer generations rebelled against that. That I
right.
want independence, I want to be my own person. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. So every system will have a consequence, rightly so.
Yeah,
And as human beings, we need to just build capacity to adapt to those consequences.
yeah.
Today we are seeing the other end of the spectrum, where the I mean, my our parents' generation would probably have seen very
Close knit.
close knit families, very very which was almost becoming suffocating for those who wanted to express themselves differently. So that was one concern then. And then our generation and the one that is following is completely opposite of that, saying that I want to express myself and I want to be independent, and I do, leading to a gap in another way, leading to the
Mm.
lack of connection, leading to a lack of community, a lack of camaraderie that one needs to survive. Human beings cannot survive in isolation. So and I think now is the time to have these conversations and understand that we need both. We need a space to express ourselves independently, as well as have a community, a connection that allows us to feel safe and secure, so that we're able to express ourselves the way we.
Yeah. But tell me, I one thing that has always concerned me, and which I have thought about, that you know the people who come to therapy, they get some sort of clarity because they feel their voice is heard, their concerns are addressed. But again, when they go back to the scenarios where they are coming from, those people haven't gone to therapy. Those
Yeah.
people are still what they are and how they are. So how do the people who have had therapy reconcile with that, or how do you change those people unless you bring them into therapy.
Ideally, it would be wonderful to have all stakeholders in our lives to
Yeah.
experience the change that we go through in therapy. And that's an ideal scenario. May not happen, often not. Um, because everybody has to be voluntarily willing
Yeah.
to, go through the process of evaluation and change and reflection and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, Having said that, it's cold outside, and this is the analogy that I use for most of my clients, because almost all my clients ask me this, that I'm sitting over here because I have a relationship issue, or I'm having issues at work, or this or that. There's always someone else or something else that's causing me to feel the way
This
I'm
way.
feeling,
Yes.
right? And I'm sitting over here trying to work on myself, whereas other people and the circumstances are not changing. And the analogy that I use for this is, imagine the cold outside. Can we go and change the cold? Can Do we have any control or influence over the weather? We don't.
Mm.
But we do have influence and impact over our own selves. So we can wear warmer clothes, we can have warmer drinks, we can keep ourselves cozy and warm and safe and secure, so that we're able to deal with the cold that is there outside.
Better. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we need to do. And which also brings me to highlight that therapy serves multiple functions. And to just broadly put them together, I think the first role of therapy is catharsis, to provide a space to the person where the person can talk and just pour their heart out, say things, and literally vomit out the emotions and thoughts and feelings that are there, which they otherwise cannot talk to other people. So that's one. Second is, it is a very reflective process. It is a process of constant back and forth of questioning, because it's talk in nature. So questioning and helping you reflect on who you are. Third, and a very significant part of therapy, is building perspectives, the reboot part of
Yeah.
it, the change part of it, which is that I need to build newer perspective, because the one that I'm holding currently is
Is not
clearly not
helping me.
helping me anymore. It came about because it was helping me at some time, but maybe it's time for me to change. That it's like
Hmm.
saying that I was wearing this coat for all these years and it was keeping me warm, but now it is not keeping me warm anymore.
Right.
I need to change. So
Yeah.
that's perspective building as a tool to adapt to the environment and the circumstances that we are part of.
Yeah.
And the fourth part of therapy, which is one of the most neglected parts of therapy, um, which I talk about so often, is the skill building. We're not, all of us are living life, and we're constantly interacting with life and adding and subtracting things from ourselves, the way we think, the way we feel, and definitely from our actions and behaviors. And if I am not able to build a skill that will allow me to help deal with my environment, that will allow me to build my resilience, my perseverance, my ability, I'm just doing half the work.
Yeah.
So skill building is super essential as a part of ensuring that there is a healthy therapeutic process you know being done.
Yeah, yeah. So, like in the past, or even now, I think, like you said, the conversations around mental health are increasing, and therefore we realize there's something called, say, intergenerational trauma, which is still a new concept because people have, they recognize it, but they don't want to admit it. So, can you talk a little bit about how sort of damaging the narratives that exist, as our conditioning that is handed to us
Hmm.
are given, and what all they can lead to?
Sure. I think we are all conditioned beings, right? And rightly so, because those conditions or that conditioning allowed me to survive certain periods of my life.
Yeah.
The fact that my environment, my family that I come from, had certain behavior patterns has added to who I am as a person. So we can't take that away. When it comes to intergenerational trauma, there are so many perspectives to it. There's a spiritual perspective to it, there's a psychological perspective to it. There are so many dynamic belief systems that surround it. But I want, without getting into all of that in detail, I want to just say that recognizing that this belief system or this thought pattern or this pattern of interaction that I have borrowed from my family is not helping me anymore is where we start to
Break the trauma.
break the trauma. And a lot of people, and all of us, right, human beings, we get stuck, or we get stuck in pushing away the trauma. Unfortunately, we can't push away the trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma exists.
Yeah.
We can like, getting over it also sounds so, I mean, it sounds so careless, but
Yeah.
we can we can accept it, put it in a nice box, keep it in a way, understand it that it's a part of my life experience, but it not necessarily defines me. And that's how you break intergenerational
Yeah.
trauma. When I, what you said, what you and I were talking
Yeah.
about earlier, you
Yeah.
said a very interesting thing. You said that, when we lose someone like a parent, we get to choose what parts of them do we keep with ourselves.
Yeah.
So we keep the good parts, and we
Yeah.
let the,
Let the
the
parts, yeah.
unhealthy parts go. And that's the same thing with trauma.
Mm.
I mean, not that there's anything good that may have come out of trauma, but
There's insight.
there's insight. And we keep a people or circumstances or situation that may have caused that trauma. We can build that choice.
Yeah.
And having that choice is what is empowering.
Yeah.
That is a choice that we need to build.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that I'm bringing up, I'm possibly bringing it up earlier, but it's because I don't want to forget this question, that we are used to talking about the stress response. Everything causes stress these days, right? It's a keyword. And the fight or flight mode of being is like the thing that we are commonly talking about. But it's the other two that I think that are less talked about, which are the freeze and fawn
So
responses.
there are
Oh,
five
what's the
trauma
fifth?
responses. There's flop
Oh,
also.
what does that mean?
Okay, so there is fight and flight, which most
Yeah.
of us are aware of. Whenever we face a circumstance or situation that triggers stress or that makes us feel unsafe, our mind, our brain automatically responds in a certain learnt pattern,
Right.
right? So it's usually fight, that I get aggressive,
Yeah.
or it's flight, that I
Yeah,
want to run
run
away
away.
and just evade the situation, or it can also be freeze, that
Yeah.
becoming like completely numb,
numb.
just still, like
Right.
just not knowing what to do, like freezing in your response completely.
Yeah.
Then there is fawn, which is
The people
people
pleaser.
pleasing, and for just trying to
That was
get
me.
validation and approval from
Oof.
people, so that I feel good about myself and I
Yeah.
feel safer in this
Yeah.
environment. And the last is flop. And very interestingly, flop is something that I'm seeing as a practitioner, as a therapist. I'm seeing flop responses come up more and more in the younger generation.
Really, what is flop?
Flop
Please.
is essentially like how the word sounds, flop.
Okay, just
Like you just like
fall.
you just fall. And when I say fall, I mean physically. You are drained, you are tired, you are exhausted. So very little stimulation triggers a lot of energy
Exhaustion.
drain, exhaustion, inability to actually move and function. And that's the flop response. And like I said earlier, very interestingly, lot of younger people, and when I say younger, I mean like people in their late teens or early 20s, are demonstrating this sign of, and this is anecdotal completely.
Why do you think that is?
I think overstimulation.
Mm.
As a world, we're very overstimulated. Like,
Yeah.
we're sitting over here, look at the amount of lights there are, our
Yeah.
phones are there, and the moment
Yeah.
you and I will finish our conversation, automatically we'll gravitate to pick up our phone,
phones. Yeah.
right? There is no pause. There is, other than the 8 hours hopefully that we get to sleep at night, there is no pause.
Pause.
And imagine the processing capacity of a phone screen or a laptop or a television, or
Yeah.
even the lights and the sounds that we're surrounded by constantly around us, is so much more than my brain's capacity to assimilate it, process it, and digest it.
So we're overwhelmed.
We're
Perennially
overwhelmed. Of course, we're
overwhelmed.
overwhelmed. And that overwhelm, when is when when a little, I mean, imagine your cup is almost full and then a little bit of stress is also added to it,
Yeah.
your response is greater.
Yeah.
You're
Triggered
you get triggered faster.
faster.
Smaller things irritate you, or smaller things can impact you, or you can feel exhausted earlier because you're already at capacity.
And I suppose a lot of it is coming because the younger people, they are surrounded by older people who do not have this self awareness, or who haven't broken their own toxic patterns and habits and whatever. So that's an added thing that the younger people are dealing with, and then they learn from that.
They are. I
So
think older people, though have taken the journey of becoming more tech savvy, have not taken the emotional and psychological journeys. I won't say all of them, but a lot of them, a lot of
required.
us haven't taken that journey that would require us to understand what we're dealing with today. And that is,
Yeah.
reflective work, self work. And again, it is so omnipresent in a culture that we are, like the Indian culture has such strong strong roots in reflective practices, in life philosophical practices, but we're so away from it.
Yeah, so I think a big problem with the older generation today is judgment. They are very easily judging, younger people and younger generations who are coping with and dealing with so much more than they were, and suddenly even we were, because it's much harder to be 10 and 20 now than it was when I was 10 and 20. you
It's very
know
interesting, every generation says this. Our time was like this, your
yes.
time is like this. We I don't think there's a comparison that's needed, that which time was more difficult. Every era, every generation has their own sociological, psychological, political, social challenges, and they have to respond to that, and the previous generation holds the responsibility to help them respond to that. And that's where we are as well. It's just that this generation has seen changes much quicker
Quicker.
than, say, us. I'm born in the 80s, and till mid 90s in India at least,
Things
the
were a certain way.
development was very slow paced. And then all of a sudden there was like this jump,
Yeah.
right? Which was great for me because I was a teenager then and I was able to adapt to it more effectively than possibly my parents did, right? So it took
Right.
time. But today, those jumps are, you know,
Far quicker.
quicker, much quicker,
Yeah.
which again puts responsibility on us as a, as a slightly older generation, to understand that they will respond differently. That's a fact. It's not a challenge. It's a reality.
So every generation, whether it's the 60s and 70s, or it's us who are, in the middle, or even, the younger generation, 30s and 20s, they're also perceiving information and processing information differently. So, for example, I mean, to pick up a very contextual example, like when a film like Animal is released, okay, someone who's 60 and 70, they'll have a totally different uh, view of it. We will process it differently because different things strike us, and the younger lot is also seeing it differently. So as a mental health professional, suppose you had to give a take on what is happening here, what are the kind of things that you would see going on?
I think nature is happening here. It's happening in a little bit more altered manner now because of the AI and the technology and everything. But I think nature is happening here. This is how life has been for centuries. This is how human beings have been for centuries. That there are three generations. And I think in the 80s, there were some movies on it also. I haven't seen Animal, so I can't comment on the movie Animal. But um, every human being, every generation will have a different perspective to the same thing, and that is a fact. Embracing that is our job, our responsibility.
But it
Because
is becoming more difficult
it
now.
is becoming difficult, because I want, or I feel comfort only when I allow myself to interact with those who have a similar belief system than that I, as I am. How
Hmm.
will we grow?
Hmm.
There is always so much to give and take. from everybody
Hmm.
who holds a different perspective than we do.
Hmm.
Now, if I'm in a resistant phase always,
Hmm.
that this does not align with my belief system, hence it is so difficult. Yes, it is difficult to understand somebody else's perspective. Everybody needn't be a mental health professional or a psychologist or a super evolved individual who has to understand a different perspective. But the reality is there are, for every single thing that exists, there are 8 billion perspectives on it, because those are the number of minds that exist in this world,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's a reality, and we can't run away from it. One of the most important things, and this is something because I work with families a lot as well, personally in my therapeutic practice, and I tell them that you may not agree with it, and that's okay. We're all allowed to have our own thought processes. Each generation or each family member may not agree with what the other person is saying, but I also needn't personalize it. It's not an attack on me personally. I think that's why we're getting stuck.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't agree with me, I take it personally that it's an
Personally.
attack on me. It's not an attack on me. As I hold my belief system, my value system, my thought process, my perspective, which I'm allowed to, so does somebody else. If I'm lucky, it's going to match. If I'm not, it's not going to match, and that's okay too.
So, what struck me about you, Astha, in the retreat, this is a bit uh, about you, the person, is that you were very open about claiming who you are and your value system and what is important to you. I mean, I remember we were having a discussion on money and, particularly how women relate to money and this whole,
Yeah.
midlife process of claiming our own money
Mm.
and claiming our the value that we have
Mm.
and own and should. um and you were very clear that for you it is important that you not only earn your own money but you also spend it.
Oh, yeah.
And you uh, believe that there is a certain value and importance to
Mm.
spending money the way you want in a very I claim this manner, which is kind of very different from how generally women are taught to perceive wealth or good times or holidays or good things. So how did that happen for you?
Um, I think what helped me tremendously are three things in life to build a perspective like this. I have been this perspective of mine has been questioned. My actions have been questioned regularly, still do. I'm okay with it now. In fact, I'm proud of it. Three things that helped me. One is my family that allowed me to be who I am. Second is my profession,
Yeah.
which allowed me to understand the value of being a human. I think that has been the biggest teaching that I have had personally. Knowledge aside, knowledge is one part of my profession, but the biggest teaching that my profession has had for me is that I, anybody, any human being, has the right to be who they are, and they will be a big mess. They will be black, white, gray, blue, pink, magenta, yellow, everything, and that's okay. I think that the acceptance of my own self as a human being, which my profession gave me, the understanding, that was great. And the third thing is my reflective practices, whether it was in the form of yoga, or it was in the form of meditation, or it is in the form of books that I read or discussions that I have. But the practice and desire to learn has helped me, you know, accept myself more and more for who I am.
So, particularly, I think women and money is like, they seem to be like two, sort of divergent themes because women have such a problem accepting and owning their money, even when they earn it and work 10 times
Hmm.
harder than men. But
Hmm.
somehow the good time that, we are entitled to good times
Hmm.
is very problematic. Do you think that is inherited or that is a product of every age?
It's a product of every age. Patriarchy, and again, I'm not a socialist or a sociology professional, or I mean, I have limited knowledge, but from a psychological perspective, I think patriarchal belief systems are so deeply rooted in us that it becomes very difficult to let go of them, which is why money, which was assigned to a particular gender, is what is accepted. It's their job. I'm telling you personally also, I have my colleagues who are male psychologists and male therapists with the same amount of work experience. I have a little more academic experience than a few of them as well. They charge more than me. And I
Really?
was having this discussion with my co-founder, and I've had this discussion so many times in so many forums where, they said that, why are they charging more than you? You are more experienced or academically aware than they are. It's just, I feel that they have the right to do it, and they can, and it's okay for them to charge the worth that they assign to their own self, their own gender, their own efforts, is a little bit more than what women do. And that is a very deeply held sociological, unconscious belief system which we have to break you know
Yeah, like I found this, even as a parent, because I have both a son and a daughter, the kind of entitlements that my son gives himself
oh yes.
is far more than my daughter. I mean, there are no permissions he looks for at all,
Mm.
you know. But
Because he's
she,
allowed to. that's
yeah,
the that's the unconscious subtle cues that he gets from his environment,
yeah.
and it's so subtle.
It's very subtle because I'm
You
raising
haven't
them
gone
the
and
same
said it.
way. I
Yeah.
have not,
Yeah.
but there are certain permissions that he gives himself
Because
automatically
he
just
is.
because.
Just because.
And my daughter will actually care about if anyone else has eaten, but not him.
Hmm.
I mean, a simple thing like that,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know. I
Because
mean,
those are roles. I mean, there are psychological theories that talk about this, that talk about how we build these archetypes. There are a lot of psychological theories that talk about how these subconscious, unconscious belief systems, how these archetypes develop in our mind about roles, responsibilities, the way we conduct ourselves, that impact us in very subtle unconscious ways, and allows us to do certain things. It requires a whole lot of consciousness. It requires a whole lot of conscientiousness and awareness to say that, okay, this is what I'm doing out of entitlement because I'm born with certain body parts,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and because my environment, my cultural existence, my social existence is influenced and injected with these belief systems.
So now that, this whole third gender and so many other types of, this LGBTQ, and that has become a very big sort of phenomenon that we are dealing with, where
Hmm.
people do not want to be restricted to one gender identity. Has that, do you feel that that has helped a lot of people, or helped break up these stereotypes, or
I
it's
think the process has started. The process has started to break the normative, the heteronormative understanding of the world. Everything which was put in black and white, and in this case, male and female, be it even objects, right? A ship
right?
is a she,
Yeah,
right? A
right.
car, whatever.
Yeah.
However we described the world, which was in two genders, is now breaking. And that break is important to embrace the capacity of humans to be humans, right? We all are so different. And I'm not an advocate, nor am I an expert in these social uh, understandings, but I think as a human being who understands human behavior, I think what we need to really get comfortable is with the fact that people are going to be different from us,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Yes, we will have certain commonalities that connect us. Now those commonalities can change. It can either be gender, or it can be a choice of food that you have, or it can be culture, or I mean, it can be big and small both. It can be common interests. It can
Yeah.
be commonalities can exist at so many levels and in so many ways. But even despite all the commonalities, we will be different from one another, and that is something that we have to accept. The humanness of being human, it needs to be, accepted. I mean, if you go back in scriptures, the scriptures that have existed for millions of years, there is so much information. Then again, I'm not an expert, but whatever little bits that I've read, I think that has opened up my mind as well, because these practices allow you to see the world in a more broader
Broader way.
perspective for what the world is,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
allow the individual differences to exist. That just because the person is not like me in gender, in gender expression, in sexuality, in culture, in religion, in any practice, that doesn't make them against me. They just
So
they make them different from me.
yeah. So one trend that has happened lately in the past 10 odd years is, I think, every school now has a counselor,
Mm.
has, a mental health counselor and a person that you can go to. But, some schools also now sort of recommend that, oh, sort of they screen children for various, their special abilities, and whether it's autism, whether it's, a highly sensitive person or something. So, do you think actually earlier all of these things existed and we just didn't have names for them? Or do you think that it is a product of these times based on, the pollution, the environment, the genetics, all these things? What do you think is
It
happening?
has to be both. It can't be either or. Yes, these things existed. A lot of it got neglected because the awareness was not there. In fact, most of it got neglected because the awareness was not there. When I was growing up, I remember, but in the when everybody who I told, I was very young when I decided that I want to go into this profession. I want to become a psychologist, and everybody's like, "Are you crazy? Like, why?
Why?
Psychologists don't earn anything. We don't need them. Yes, you can if you want to be in, if you want to go into academics, then sure, why not go ahead? But what are you going to do? Who's a counselor?" Then slowly the concept of school counselors came in, who started doing assessments for academic understanding, right? Like scholastic assessments, which revolved around what's your aptitude, what profession you should take. That career
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 related.
counseling
Yeah.
started happening, and the reason that why that started happening was because jobs started becoming very defined. So our generation saw that shift. It was
Shift.
very basic. Like today, I know it was so
Yeah,
basic. It was
basic.
it was
Yeah.
almost like this thing. I think that's one part, that the lack of awareness existed. I understand today that possibly I was a very bad student in math. I used to find it very difficult to understand concepts of physics, and I realized that had I had a special educator who would have helped me understand those concepts better, maybe I would have done slightly better
Better.
in my academics. No regrets. I think whatever I did well, but um, that experience would have changed for me,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
that's definitely, the lack of awareness has changed. I mean, sorry, the lack of awareness did contribute to us not understanding the existence of a lot of these concerns, especially learning disabilities, because they're not very visible. Autism, I mean, the extreme autistic cases were visible then, they're visible now. The resources for them have changed, have evolved, developed, which is great. The other part, which is that, is it a product of these times? Yes, I think the overstimulation of our brains from the moment we are conceived, forget born, conceived, has contributed to it.
Change.
A lot of lifespan changes are happening or have happened over the generations, in the sense that women are having kids later. But the social experiences of children are changing as well. Like, I know I have two kids at home, one of whom was born during the pandemic, and one of whom was born just before the pandemic. I see so much of difference between them in the way they interact with the world, right? So these experiences have, the current circumstances definitely have an impact, but there is also an impact of lack of there was an impact of lack of awareness. Today the awareness is changing, and it's, like, I think movies like Tare Zameen Par and all of that, they just sort of evoked a sentiment in people and made
Yeah.
them be like, okay, you know what, we have to look at this as well. This is important also.
So, what are the key trends, if I can put it in such a crude manner, that you are seeing in terms of, young people coming to you? What are the key concerns that they are coming with?
Anxiety. There's so much anxiety.
And why do you think that is?
I think we need to understand anxiety. First of all, we confuse anxiety and stress. We look at anxiety as a function of not having the predictability of
Yeah.
the future, the anticipation, the stress that the anticipation brings with itself. How I look at anxiety is, as human beings, our brain is the job of our brain, the brain inside the structure, is to survive, right? And if we and it because the circumstances now are so much more volatile, the pressure on that brain is a lot more, because now I have to process what's going on Instagram, also on my Zoom meeting also, and how I'm interacting with people. So there's just like so much. I've been speaking about
Yeah, yeah.
overstimulation from the beginning. So I think because of that, because of circumstances, because of not having,
Spread very thin.
we're spread very thin, which means what? My brain thinks that, oh my God, I don't have control and influence over what's going to happen to me. So if I don't have control and influence over what's going to happen to me, of course I'm going to be anxious. Of course I'm going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
My cup will constantly be full. And I would be stuck in those processes consistently. And I think that is what I would attribute as a big concern.
I think also that the perception of so many expectations, you know, that we had much less expectations of ourselves than younger people have of themselves, because
Because they're more exposed, they're more aware.
yeah,
For us, having once in a lifetime trip abroad was
was
like
in
such a
a
big
big
deal.
deal. Yeah.
Today it's not. I mean, it's a very insignificant part of human life. I mean, a holiday, but still, you're right, the expectations, the um what all I can achieve in this world, my horizons
Yes.
have widened so
Widened so
much.
much. Yeah.
And that obviously puts pressure,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? It
Hmm.
also makes us, it confuses us, especially when we are growing up. It can confuse us whether am I borrowing my understanding of myself from those around me,
World. Yeah.
or is it me?
Me.
And this is something that I discuss with a lot of my clients, which is borrowed thought. Is it yours? Is it my thought, or is it somebody else's? Are these expectations mine, or are they coming from the environment? Like, am I looking at how my friends are doing on social media or LinkedIn and seeing that, oh, you know what, I did
I.
not publish a paper this term,
Yeah.
and I didn't do this, and I didn't do that. There's that constant comparison because it's in your face now,
Right.
right? So
Right.
those things, the horizons that have widened, the channeling that
Yeah.
we have, all
Yeah.
of that has
Yeah.
contributed
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what about at the midlife? At the midlife, what are the kind of issues that come up then? And particularly, I think this gender norms and, feeling that, there's a fight for equity
Hmm.
somehow. I mean,
Hmm.
one notices those conversations come up a lot. So, what kind of goes on then?
I think midlife is such an interesting phase to be in because it has so much opportunity because you're aware enough to understand yourself and hopefully are comfortable with who you are, and you also have the ability to impact your own life choices. You're settled in terms of hopefully settled in terms of your finances, your career. You've experienced a lot in life, and it's an interesting phase to pause and reflect, right? The concerns that come up are again around anxiety. A lot of relationship concerns come up at this time
Right.
also, because a lot, if you're married, then a lot of relationships have stagnated. There's a need for change, or there's a need for this thing. I see midlife as a very dynamic phase which requires our presence and change,
And
right?
there is a sense of recalibration, isn't there?
Exactly.
Which
Exactly.
where you do need help.
Yeah, and you
So
also, I mean, I think along with, one is the one-to-one help that you take from a therapist, or like from a professional,
right.
or a life coach, or a business coach, or an executive
Mm,
coach. But
mm.
I think it also requires that courage from you yourself, from within you, to
Yeah.
say that, okay, now is my time to take a pause and reflect. to
Yeah.
just, check in with myself now, because it's about reprioritizing. A lot of
Right.
reprioritizing will happen. Up until now, making money, doing this, doing that, there was a very streamlined process that was
Process.
being followed. Now you can pause and say that, okay, now what do I want to do? So that choice
Yeah.
is there, that and that only comes when we calibrate with
And there is
ourselves.
also, I think, a limited sort of sense that, oh, there's mortality, right? Because up until now, you're on one
Mortality was not a
track.
question. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It wasn't a
Yeah.
big
So
question.
it wasn't a big question. Now, suddenly, you can see the older people getting older and the younger lot, coming into
Coming up.
their own.
Yeah.
So suddenly, you're struck by that. That
There's a lot more. The threats of this age and the threats of every age are very different. The threats of this age are very interesting, because they, it's what you rightly said. The younger lot is coming up, so there's more
more.
energy, there's
Yeah.
more creativity, there's more awareness,
Yeah.
there's newness and a lot of novelty in my experiences with that generation now, because they're coming up with their own. I mean, that's a young
Right.
mind, right? It's more
Right.
creative, it's more free.
Yeah.
Mine is more conditioned.
Yeah.
Whereas the ones older to me, the ones that I possibly relied on for support,
They're
or
receding.
they're receding, and to accept that mortality has come closer,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
become more realistic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that you said to me earlier is that, that I remember at the retreat we spoke about this, that one assumes that the older generation will not need mental health interventions. I
Interventions,
mean,
yeah.
we kind of grew up thinking that the older people are the wisest. But you said that some of your most interesting cases come from, I remember you were talking about a particular, married
Okay.
couple
Yeah.
where, you found that a lot of anguish and anxiety and a lot of anger
Hmm.
can be there in the older generation as
In
well.
any generation, I mean, we're all human, right? So
Right.
just because I'm 60, 70, 80 doesn't make me less of a human.
Yeah.
It makes me an experienced human, but it definitely still makes me a human. So I still feel hungry, I still feel thirsty, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I will still feel anxious, I will still feel fear, I will still feel apprehension, everything.
No, but it must be really interesting, say, for a 70-plus-year-old to seek the tools that they need to deal with whatever their life
It
situation is
warms
from
my
someone.
heart, honestly. I have a few clients. I don't work with geriatrics. That's not the population that I work with, because I get very emotional with them. But I do have a few clients in my family setups where they're 70 plus and they're coming in for therapy willingly.
Amazing.
And it is so beautiful to see that, because they're like, we didn't know something like this existed, because we needed someone to talk to. Like, I don't know if what I'm doing with my kids and my grandkids now, is it good? Like, they're irritated with me or I'm irritated with them.
Wow.
It's impacting our relationship. And these are multiple conversations that I've had. Again, anecdotal, but I think, of course, that by that age you also become more rigid, right? So you're more
Right.
resistant to change, which is also a reality. And that's fine. And when people come, and when younger generation, like, or mid generation like ours, comes and tells me that, oh, my parents are not willing to change, I'm so irritated, I'm like, it's okay. They, as you are allowed to resist change, so are they,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it's just, I think, again, it's humanness.
Yeah.
And but more and more people are coming up for it, more and more people are having conversations around it. And I had this very interesting conversation with my grandmother, who's 90 plus, and she and I were talking, and she was just cribbing about something, and I was like, relax, I can't do this anymore, was her, like, at this age, don't expect me to do this anymore. And I was like, listen, you've learned how to operate a phone after the age of 70, 75. You just spoke to me about how you think the cow sway that we were having at home could have a better taste. And now you're telling me that you can't change. You just did. Change is
Yeah.
happening to you every day. You know how to operate a smart TV, which you learned like just 5 years back.
Yeah.
You know how to use your phone, how to make a WhatsApp call, how to do video, how to do this, that. How are you doing it? Because you have an active brain. Give
Yeah.
yourself that confidence
Chance.
and the chance to, yes, it's
Yeah.
going to be difficult, no doubt. It's difficult at 10 to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
So imagine at 90, it's going
Yeah.
to be insane.
Yeah.
Or at 70 or at 60. But do we have the capacity to do it? Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And neuroplasticity as a concept has proven that, 5 decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing that the older generation would be dealing with is the impending death, right? That's the
Yeah.
big question that becomes very difficult for them to kind of prepare for,
Hmm.
because I don't think anyone can prepare for death, but at the same time it does become the bigger question as one gets older,
It's
right?
closer, it's more real. Your physical capacity gets limited. Your ability to do things that you were able to do, very simple things like getting up in the morning and going to the washroom, or
Yeah.
brushing your teeth, or wearing, like wearing, I've seen my parents and grandparents struggle in winters now in the
Now,
last
yeah.
few years. It's age, it's body degenerating, and to accept that, to accept mortality takes a whole lot of self-awareness. And that's such a deep yet beautiful part of mental health practice as well. It's existential therapy that I've been reading a lot about. I don't practice it, but I read a lot about it because it's so fascinating. Questions about death and dying are, I mean, again, if you read our scriptures, if you read the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Gita and everything, there's all of this.
Yes.
All of this is discussed. We've just forgotten how to discuss it in our
Yeah.
daily lives. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
once that comes back in, whether it's through a mental health professional or through, the communities that we are a part of, I think it'll just make this process easier. The overwhelm and the anxiety around these questions
Mm.
can be,
Yeah.
navigated.
Yeah. 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 So, if you had to sum up the need for a mental health professional to someone who has been resisting going to one,
Hmm.
to someone who is either in denial of whatever is going on, or who says ki ye kya hai, how would you tell people why should one go and consult?
the the resistance to seeking mental health help is because we consider, again, ourselves, we put ourselves either in a box of normal or abnormal. So if I'm abnormal or not normal, that's when I need to go to a mental health professional, which is not true. I think people need to understand that I can be as normal as I am, but I can still be facing challenges, which is a part of life. And
Yeah.
mental health practitioners have a role of, yes, identifying the abnormal and the diseases and the illnesses surrounding mental health, which is there, but there are other things in the spectrum also. So the spectrum of mental health essentially has 4 5 categories. On one end, there's a green, which is like, okay, all's good, everything's good, life is good. You are difficult circumstances come, you deal with them, you move on. Very few people are there in that category. The other end is a
Yeah.
severe illness, right? The incapacitating mental illness, such as, I mean, I don't want to go into all of that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's illness, which, again, very small percentage of the total population would fall under that category also.
Yeah.
Most of us are in the middle.
Middle. Yeah.
So the middle has, you shuffle between unhealthy, reactive, and injured. So,
Yeah.
unhealthy is when we start to build and develop unhealthy practices, unhealthy experiences, unhealthy reactions to situations, which, again, most of us fall in that category.
Hmm.
Or the next one, which is, that I am reactive. So, my life experiences, my internal and external circumstances have led me to be more reactive, right? Which is where depression, anxiety,
Yeah. Right.
relationship
Right.
issues,
Yeah.
lack of concentration, lack of attention,
Absolutely.
all of these things come in. And
Hmm.
then there is injured, when my
Yeah.
life experiences
There's
have
a wounding.
caused me wounding, trauma, all of that. So most of us fluctuate
Yeah.
between these three,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
these three just requires skill, conversation, perspective, and a safe space
Yeah.
to, come more towards the green side.
Okay. And now the last question. What does whips and chains mean to you?
That's very interesting. I think whips, the first thought that came to me is, when you and I also spoke about it at the retreat. I think chains represent, the conditioned belief systems that we have, that are just not allowing us. And I imagine this, this animal who's chained to a particular space and is trying to just run away, or is, every time they see something, they're running away, but then the chain is holding them back, like, the foot is tied to it and it's hurting them. So
Yeah.
one is that. And whips, I would, in a lighter way, I think they're the whips that we get
Get
in life,
in life.
that just wakes us up and tells
Yeah.
us, you know what, like wake up,
Go.
like
Yeah.
change, do
Yeah.
something,
Yeah. Yeah.
that. So I think that's what whips and chains mean to me personally. And breaking the chains and embracing the whips is how I would look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's been lovely, chatting with you, Astha,
My
and
pleasure.
actually, knowing and, really making peace with the fact that mental health is somewhere you can go for skill building was the new one, because I knew that it's, it gives you a perspective, it gives you a safe space, but actually that it gives you skills and tools to negotiate is something that's going home with me.
Thank you so
So
much.
thanks so much. It was lovely having you.
My pleasure.